I had another major policy initiative, which I initiated in 2003. And that's something called eminent domain, the abuse of eminent domain. We hold these truths to be self-evident. You know, when they wrote those words, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, there was a big discussion between Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson over making those words life, liberty, and the right to own property. But the final conclusion was that the pursuit of happiness, and in that was inculcated the right to own one's property free of the will of government. Government taking one's property for their own use. And, but unfortunately, after the tragic Kelo decision, which pretty much gutted our property rights, government has now almost unlimited ability to take one's private property for private development. I think that's a travesty. So I decided to do something about it. So I put a ballot question on the ballot in Bogota in 2003. Simple ballot question that gave the voters the right to decide. Should the municipal government be limited from using eminent domain to take private property for private development and return eminent domain to its original use for a public purpose? Well, this was discussed heavily. People spoke out against it. They said, well, the government needs to be able to reinvigorate neighborhoods. I mean, can't they make the decisions for us? If we have a neighborhood that needs to be rebuilt, don't we want our bureaucrats making that decision? Well, I guess not, because that ballot question in a town that is 2-to-1 Democrat-Republican passed by a remarkable 95% of the vote. 95%. Unheard of in any ballot initiative. And I'm convinced the other 5% just pushed the wrong button, by the way. But when that ballot question passed in Bogota, I thought it would send a resounding message to Trent, to legislators and to other towns. That didn't happen. They ignored it. There was an attempt made by Assemblyman Richard Merkt, one of my opponents in this primary for governor, and I worked with him on getting that same initiative statewide, but we couldn't even get out of committee. Couldn't even get enough of none of the Democrats and a couple of Republican votes to give the voters of the state the right to decide on whether or not we would continue the abuse of eminent domain. New Jersey is one of now only 18 states that has done nothing to curtail eminent domain abuse. And New Jersey has had more cases of eminent domain abuse than any other state. So certainly, we can make a major difference on the local level. Because one of the issues that I bring this book to bear on, I talk about the debt and negotiating contracts and school issues, is the critical importance of local government. Local government is the level of government that is closest to the people. It's the level of government that responds best to the people and best to preserve individual liberty and the ability to rise to our best potential. We are hearing consistently now, over the past decade or more, that New Jersey has too many small towns. Too many little local towns where people elect those who are going to govern, who look out for their private local interests, parochial interests, as if that's a bad thing. You know, there's a great book, Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. I would highly recommend you read that book. He talks about traveling this part of the country in 1835 and all these little towns and how these people could come together and govern themselves and form all these great associations, volunteer fire departments and church groups to deal with their local issues, and how dynamic and how vibrant it was. And that is what made New Jersey such a powerful, dynamic state. We have more small towns and more local governments than any other state in the country. And it was because of that that this state could take advantage of its local strengths and weaknesses, its demographic changes, to compete economically and to create a tapestry of diversity where everyone has an opportunity to rise to their best potential or move to the area to which they are best suited. That is now under attack in a number of ways, through the state's failed co-initiatives and through these attempts to squash local governments and force them into a series of big cities. So New Jersey becomes Newark North, Newark South, Newark Central, and maybe even Newark on the shore. You know, Governor Corzine and those who share his beliefs, and many Republicans as well, will argue we have too many small towns. They say we have too much democracy. Well, my response is we have too much bureaucracy. And small towns are the heart and soul of the state, and we should never allow those towns to be eliminated, because with them you take away the ability, like I did, to become part of government. See, in a small town, anybody can run for office and win. It doesn't matter if you're a millionaire or a cardiovascular surgeon or a carpenter or a homemaker. You get out there, you meet your neighbors, and you will get elected. There's countless stories of millionaires going into their little hometown just thinking they had the money to winning, losing to somebody who far less well-financed, like I did when I ran against an incumbent mayor. But see, the problem with electing all these small-town officials is they get in the way. They get in the way of the dreams of the bureaucrats in Trenton, who think they can do a better job governing us from their white ivory towers than we can at home. They get in the way of things like eminent domain abuse by putting ballot questions on the ballot. Those local elected officials get in the way of government-mandated housing projects. They get in the way of the state borrowing without voter approval and mortgaging our children's future. That's the real reason that the Trenton bureaucracy wants to eliminate local government in small towns, because it takes away the right of us as individuals to govern ourselves the way the Founding Fathers envisioned it. And that's something we should never forget, because as we give up that liberty and that power to centralize control, we're giving up our own individual freedom. And that's something we should never relinquish, not for whatever dollar sign they may attach to it. That's the theme of my book. That's the theme of my campaign for governor. That is from which I've derived my commitment and my reason for running. And, in conclusion, I'll say this. That great document, the United States Constitution, was not simply a spontaneous new thought. It wasn't just a bunch of guys who got together 235 years ago who had a great new idea. That was derived from a couple of thousand years of learning and suffering from Aristotle's, from Plato's Republic, down even through the New and the Old Testament, through John Locke, through the Magna Carta, all emerging at the end of a couple of thousand years of human experience to create that great vision and that great document. And ultimately, anyone running for office should be running because they're committed to preserving that vision and what we call the American dream. And that's what my book's about. It might be on the parochial, it might be on the local level. Certainly, it's what America's about. So I thank you for having me, and I'll take any questions if you like. Yes.
Thanks, Steve, for coming today. Just wanted to open up the floor to questions. I'm going to ask the first question, if you don't mind. I read your book, and I was just wondering, maybe if it's not too early to tell, what would you do for the first, if you were elected governor, what would be your first action, if you could describe that briefly?
Well, the first challenge to any leader is to gather the finest minds possible to implement plans. I mean, you have to be surrounded by the very best people. And that, with that accomplished, and it's going to take real work in finding those who are willing to challenge the status quo, who have the ability to implement plans, to manage, whether it's managing the DEP or the Department of Agriculture or who the chief of staff is, gathering around the best possible individuals is step one. I have a three-point plan for governing this state. It's the plan on which I will run in the primary, run in the general, and that is to, number one, cut the size of state government by no less than 20%. I happen to know that's very doable. I've studied the state budget for years. I know what it's about. We need to relieve people in New Jersey of the high cost of taxes, and we can't do that unless we cut the size of government. Certainly, given a $33 billion budget and the huge number of departments, it can take a lot of qualified and trained people to make that happen.